Let me begin by saying congratulations to Bishop's University for its ability to exist for 175 years. Longevity is worthy of celebration, but longevity without change is not worthy of celebration. It needs to look at the question of how it's evolving and how it has evolved over the years, because the way things are today is not the same as they were 175 years ago when Bishop's was first established, or this country was in stages leading up to Confederation.
Bishop's College was established in 1843 on land donated by Lieutenant Colonel William Morris of the British Army. The nearby Lennoxville was just a village in the middle of the eastern townships, a vast region only recently opened up for settlement. United Empire loyalists and settlers from the United States and British Isles found this to be a wild land, rich with potential. One loyalist, Lucy Peel, describes the townships as a country where the active and industrious must prosper, the idle starve. There is on every side endless room for improvement, and even our small farm would take thousands to make it look anything like an English estate.
Well, Lucy Peel was a settler in this area. But what exactly does it mean to open a territory up for settlement? What does it mean to found a university at the edge of British imperial reach? It's worth remembering that colonization is an ongoing process that includes defining and redefining land, first as wilderness, then as property and resources that are just sitting there, waiting to be developed economically and culturally. So, establishing an Anglican divinity school played a key role in the European redefinition of this territory.
Looking back at Bishop's founding, Professor Robin Burns wrote, "Civilization had come to an alien and sometimes hostile frontier, as barren and bleak as the landscape in the earliest engraving. It shows a brick building with some stone in a British style, an assertion of permanence when most buildings in the region were wooden and American-inspired."
The very monumental architecture of Bishop's College was a statement about Eurocentric superiority. It needs to be understood that it's not just land that's redefined in the process of colonization. Indigenous people come to be seen as impermanent, as nomads, and their economic, political, and cultural relationship to this land gets erased. The British King George III had committed to protecting and respecting the sovereignty of First Nations in 1763, as expressed in the Treaty of Niagara of 1764. But these guarantees weren't universal and did not seem to include the Abenaki. Then, after the American War of Independence, the new international border cut right through the Abenakis' territory, so each country just defined them as being indigenous to the other side. This process of erasing 11,000 years of Abenaki history would just accelerate with Confederation in 1867. After all, nation building depends on asserting control over land, not just physically, but ideologically as well. That means that Indigenous territory gets rewritten as British colonial space through a whole system of governance, including surveying, mapping, and even property law. It also involved religious, cultural, and educational institutions that established the collective identity of this colonial society. These institutions wrote Indigenous people out of the colonial narratives of progress and advancement. And Bishop's was part of all that. It was mandated to teach strictly European traditions of theology, natural philosophy, and the classics.
Bishop's College was to be the principal educational institution of the Quebec Diocese of the Anglican Church of British North America. Queen Victoria defined this mandate in the Royal Charter, charging the university with the education of youth in the doctrines and duties of the Christian religion, and for their instruction in the various branches of science and literature. The university continued to be directed by the Anglican Church until 1947, We can see this Anglican heritage to this day in the identity and culture of bishops, which Maclean's University Guide referred to as Oxford on the Massawippi in 2009.
So I think what we need to think about is, how have we evolved? How have we changed, and how do we need to continue to change?
You know, to answer a question of what does it mean for us to see that the university has decided to start to recognize whose land they walk softly on. Don't think for 1 minute the university decided this on their own. Our ancestors were here long before. They've hidden many stories in every piece of ground you walk on. They're the ones who whispered in the ears of the university to remember whose land they're on. Our ancestors will always remain here. And as the newcomers' ancestors spend time on this land, they will leave something behind too. Not only something for us to share, but something for our ancestors to share with your ancestors. So what does it mean for us that people are starting to truly recognize that they're there on our lands? It lets us know that our ancestors are finally starting to speak loud enough and people are hearing.
I think the beautiful part, the interesting part for me, is to know that our people, whenever we'll be walking here in the mountain or where the trees are, that our ancestors were walking there too. And the San Francisco River is not very far from here. And I feel that I hear the spirit of the river because our people canoed on that river for many, many, many years. You know, when we're talking of the time of our ancestors in this province, in particular Lake Mégantic and the southern part of Quebec, dates 11,000 years that Wabanaki people have been walking on this land. So everywhere we go where the nature is, I always feel all my ancestors were passing by here. And for me, it's sacred.
Well, my first question for a student who's brand new is always to ask them, well, where do they come from? Because if you're coming from another country, then it's a different conversation that I'm going to have. But if they're coming from within Canada, another province, then that would kind of be the starter. You know, where do you come from? I'm from Ontario. Okay, so what part of Ontario are you from? Do you know of any Indigenous people around you? Do you know the traditional territory that's there? And kind of start to bring it home, because what's really important is positionality, understanding your position, where you're from, situating yourself, and knowing the history. It's very important to know history, because history informs the decisions that we make. And I think that that's lost often. You know, that how important reflecting on the past can determine, you know, the choices that we make now.
So where are you from? And where are you now? What histories are you part of as you live here, study here, work here? And what responsibilities flow from that? How has the university evolved since its foundation? And what is still needed? Whose memory will inform how we mark 175 years of Bishop's University and 11,000 years of the place that Abenaki call Nikito Teguasis? How do our conversations and actions build towards the next 175 years together?